Hi, kids. Welcome to Miss Nancy's Bible College for Kids. Today's lesson, I'm so excited to give you. I've never done this one before, but it's some things that Jesus borrowed and some things that Jesus bought. So it starts in Luke 2. Let's go ahead and get your pen and paper in case there's time for the questions. It came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. And this taxing was first made when Cyrenius was governor of Syria. And all went to be taxed, every one into his own city. And Joseph also went up from Galilee out of the city of Nazareth into Judea unto the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was the house and lineage of David. To be taxed, this is why, to be taxed with Mary, his espoused wife. That means he was engaged to this lady. And she being great with child. And so it was that while they were there, the days were accomplished that she should be delivered. And she brought forth her firstborn. Now that's a big word. Firstborn son. And wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger. Why a manger? Because there was no room for them in the inn. So the first thing that Jesus borrowed was a manger. And this story is told 3 times in the Bible. Then we go back to Matthew chapter 14. And when it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, This is a desert place, and the time is now past. Send the multitude away, because they had many people following everywhere they went, that they may go into the villages and buy themselves victuals. Now that's a country word for food. But Jesus said unto them, They need not depart, ye give them to eat. And they say unto him, We have here but 5 loaves and 2 fishes. He said, Bring them hither to me. And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the grass, and took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and brake and gave the loaves to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. And they did all eat and were filled, wasn't no scrimping, and they took up the fragments that remained, 12 baskets full. And they that had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. So Jesus here borrowed a lunch. And this was told 4 times. But one other time, it was that there was 4,000 fed. And there was 7 loaves and just a few fishes. So I just want you to know this story is very important because he puts it in there several times. Each of these are actually. So let's go on. In Matthew 17. And when they were come to Capernaum, they that received tribute money came to Peter and said, Doth not your master pay tribute? He saith, Yes. And when he was come into the house, Jesus prevented him, saying, What thinkest thou, Simon? Of whom do the kings of the earth take custom or tribute? Of their own children or of strangers? Peter saith unto him, Of strangers. Jesus saith unto him, Then are the children free. Notwithstanding, that means nevertheless or whatever, just anyway, I'll go on. Lest we should offend them, go thou to the sea, and cast a hook, and take up the fish that first cometh up. And when thou hast opened his mouth, so it's a male fish, thou shalt find a piece of money. Take that, that take, and give unto them for me and thee. So he borrowed a coin out of a fish's mouth to pay tribute while Peter was here on earth. They didn't want to offend nobody. It wasn't about him, so he didn't mind to do it anyway. Then we go on. Then here's some things that Miss Nancy it breaks my heart to say about some things that Jesus borrowed in this story. Matthew 27. Then the soldiers of the governor, I want to pause right there a minute. This is right before Jesus is going to be crucified. The soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the common hall and gathered unto him the whole band of soldiers. And they stripped him and put him on a scarlet robe. He borrowed a scarlet robe for a short amount of time. And when they had platted a crown of thorns, now he should be wearing the crown of all crowns, but they platted a crown of thorns and they put it on his head, so he borrowed a crown of thorns. And a reed in his right hand, it wasn't his reed, so he borrowed that. And they bowed the knee before him and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews. Well, you know what? They gave him false worship, so he borrowed that, but really he deserved that. They was making fun of him, but he did get it. And then here's something he borrowed Miss Nancy hadn't even thought about. They spit upon him. He borrowed the spit on his face for a little while. And then they took that reed from his right hand that he had borrowed and smote him on the head. So he got hit in the head with it. And after that they had mocked him, they took the robe off from him and put his own raiment on him and led him away to crucify him. And as they came out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. Him they compelled to bear his cross. So he borrowed that cross too. And children, they drove nails into his hands when he was hanging there and into his feet. So he didn't need them very long either. So he borrowed the cross and he borrowed the nails. He didn't borrow the spear that drove in his side. They had that in their hands. But still, before we go on with the things that Jesus bought, I will go over the questions and answers. So why did Joseph and Mary go to Bethlehem in the first story? They went to pay taxes, didn't they? Why did they go to Bethlehem? Because Joseph was in the lineage of David. And when was the first taxing, or who was over the first taxing as a governor of Syria? Cyrenius. But who made the decree that the taxes should be? If you get either one of these two names, you're doing wonderful. Caesar Augustus. What was Mary's condition? She was heavy with child, wasn't she? She did drop that baby there, didn't she? But where was Jesus born? And that was the first thing that he borrowed. He was born in a manger. Why was that? Why wasn't he in a motel or a big fancy home? They said that there was no room for him. Babies, do you have room for Jesus? If you have him in your heart, you do. If not, you need to ask him. You know, we'll get on to that later. But in the second and the third story, what was it that Jesus borrowed? He borrowed a lad's lunch, didn't he? When Jesus and his disciples were in a desert place, what was the problem there? There was a multitude gathered, wasn't there? And they'd been with him so long. So what did Jesus tell his disciples to give them? He said, you give them some food, because they was wanting them to go to town to buy some victuals. But what was their response to Jesus? They said, we just have like 5 loaves and 2 fishes. What's that among all these people? Well, Jesus told them what? He said, bring it to me. And then he said, make the multitude sit down. And so they did. Then Jesus looked up to heaven like he always did. And he broke that. And he asked God to bless it. And he gave it to the disciples. And they gave it to the people. And how many was fed? 5,000 or more men. Not even counting women and children. And then in the other story, I just gave you a brief thing about it. How many was fed there? 4,000. And how many loaves did they have? 7 loaves and a few fishes. So he didn't do it just one time. He really didn't. But anyway, in the fourth story, what did Jesus borrow? He borrowed a piece of money, a coin, didn't he? Where did they get that piece of money? out of a fish's mouth. Who caught it? Peter. Where did he catch it? In the sea. How many times did it take him to catch it? One. But why was they having to borrow the coin? They didn't really have to, but why did they get the coin? To pay the debt collectors, it was to pay tribute. So I don't really know, something about Caesar versus Jesus. They wouldn't have had to. They wouldn't, condemned if they didn't, but he didn't want to offend him, so he did it. But then, in the last part of these stories, what was some things that Jesus borrowed? He borrowed a scarlet robe, didn't he? Yeah, he did. And then, what did they put on his head? A crown of thorns, so he borrowed that. What did they put in his right hand? They put a rod or a staff, didn't they? And then what did they do with that? They hit him on the head with it, didn't they? Anyway, and then they gave him worship. But it was false worship, wasn't it? So what did they say? They bowed the knee, acted humble, and said, "Hail, King of the Jews." Well, you know what? He was. And then when they came out, they saw a man named Simon there. What did Simon help do? Carry Jesus' cross. So he borrowed that cross. And while he was on the cross, what did he borrow? He borrowed the nails that they put into his hands and feet, didn't they? That's some things that Jesus borrowed while he was here on earth. But then I want to tell you some things that Jesus bought while he was here. He bought Miss Nancy. He bought a lot of my friends, all of my family that's at that age. And he bought you, if you are a born-again Christian. His shed blood on the cross bought anybody that called on his name. If they believe that Jesus Christ died on the cross, was buried, and arose again the third day. And if they believe that, or if you believe it and you've never asked him, "Come into my heart and save me, Jesus," that's all you got to do. He purchased us. The least we can do is live for him, because he died on that cross to save us, to take us to heaven. I hope you love this story. Miss Nancy does. So I'll see you next time. Bye, kids.